Magnus Carlsen is a living legend for various reasons, most of which have something to do with the way he plays chess, and the aspect of his game that we're going to be focusing on today is his freakish ability to find creative and destructive ways to part with his second most powerful piece on the board, the Tower of Power, the Pillar of Pestilence, the Cylinder of Satan. I am of course talking about the Rook. And in this most recent titled Tuesday, the chess world witnessed Magnus mercilessly traumatize at least 3 of his grandmasterly opponents with shocking offerings of his rook that seemed to come out of nowhere. And as we're about to see in the 2 incredible games that I have selected for you today, it was an offer they couldn't refuse. But couldn't really accept either. In short, they were shafted. So fasten your seatbelt, or don't even bother. It's probably not going to help you. We're just going to go full Tyler Durden in this one and embrace the mayhem as we dive right into our game number 1. Magnus Carlsen has dominion over the White Kingdom, and he kicks off this brutal hosing with f4, the beloved bird opening, played in about 1 out of every 400 master level games, and rejected in 399 as it needlessly weakens the king side by opening this here diagonal. This is one of only 3 opening moves that has the ability to lead to the quickest possible checkmate, the other being f3 and g4. That never looks great on a resume, but it does take a little central control, which makes it a bit better than the 6 or 7 moves that are inferior to it. Magnus's opponent, Grandmaster Liu Xianglei, responds with the 3rd most popular move in this position, c5. d5 is most common here, immediately occupying the center with the pawn, but okay, he's getting out of the main line bird, whatever that's worth. We have knight to f3, knight to c6, and after e4, the game has now transposed into a Sicilian defense, specifically the McDonald attack, as signified by this pawn duo on e4 and f4. Play continues g6, preparing the old fianchetto, looking to dominate some dark squares. Bishop to b5, looking to dominate that knight on c6, maybe even take it out and damage the black pawn structure. Liu says, I think not, as he drops it into d4, giving a counter kick to the bishop, although allowing Magnus to play knight takes d4, inflicting upon him the doubled pawns after c takes d4 without having to give up the bishop pair. So what's the excuse for this? Well, black does now have a pawn nicely entrenched in the white position, which can be well supported with moves like bishop to g7, as well as the move played next after Magnus castles, which is queen to b6, attacking the bishop on b5, while also setting up a potential discovered check. But the engine is not a fan of this move, apparently thinking that the move a4, simply defending the bishop, is of more use to white than queen to b6 was for black, and I'm guessing this has something to do with white's knight making its way to c4, which will be coming with an attack on the black queen. But Magnus puts his bishop on c4, taking aim at the king side, which may or may not be quite as good. We have bishop to g7, no surprise there, d3, d6, knight to d2, and now we come to a moment of truth. Black has run out of obvious moves and now must decide how to develop his knight on g8. So what would you play in this position? Take a moment, collect your thoughts, and then feel free to share your answer in the comments. The correct way to proceed is with knight to f6, a move that Liu does not play. Now my guess is that he's a bit concerned about an immediate e5, which would be very good for white if not for the fact that the knight can go to g4, defended by the bishop, threatening to come into e3 with a fork. So white should probably play something like knight to f3, just covering that square with his bishop. A more menacing move, though ultimately incorrect, would be e6, when after knight to e3, e takes f7 check, king to f8, and queen to e2, the position is getting pretty messy and probably not so easy to evaluate, as evidenced by the engine's recommendation not to even take the rook on f1, but rather play bishop to g4, hitting the queen again, and then after queen to f2, play knight takes c2, with a borderline winning position for black, though to a non-silicon entity, maybe not obviously so. What's played in the game is not the correct knight to f6, but the overly, although understandably cautious, e6, just looking to stable that steed on the more stable e7 square, where it will not be subject to any e5 attack. Seems logical, but the engine utterly condemns it, since after white's strongest reply, f5, biting into the light squared structure shielding black's still uncastled king, there is no knight to e7 unless you're partial to getting forked with f6 hitting both knight and bishop. There are stranger proclivities out there, even on the chessboard, some of which don't even involve playing chess. Of course, taking twice on f5 would only open the e file to the king. That's not worth a measly pawn. So here, after making only 9 moves, the engine is saying that Liu Xianglei has already gotten himself into a losing position. Which just goes to show how powerful these offbeat openings can be. I mean, if a Grandmaster can be this unprepared against a second-rate opening like the bird attack, sorry to you bird enthusiasts, how much more dangerous could it be to a much lower-rated opponent? Probably very. So you might consider adding this to your opening repertoire. Anyway, Magnus now plays another second-rate move, though still probably winning, a4, in preparation for his next move, which after knight to e7 from Liu is bishop to b5 with check, clearing the c4 square, which he now realized is going to be a good place to put his knight. Now what black needs to play here is the extremely unintuitive king to f8, and the reason is that after what's played in the game, knight to c6, knight to c4 hitting the queen, queen to c7, e5, d takes e5, and f takes e5, white is threatening to come into d6 with check, followed by rook takes f7 when it's basically game over for team black. Now if the knight were still on e7 here and the king on f8, then knight to d6 would not be coming with check. Black could then respond knight to f5, blocking the f-file while challenging that invasive beast on d6. Now in case anyone's curious about bishop takes e5, this would fail to bishop takes c6 check, b takes c6, knight takes e5, queen takes e5, queen to f3 hitting both undefended pawns on c6 and f7, queen to c7 defending both, and queen to f6 hitting both rook and undefended pawn on e5. In the game, Liu prudently leaves that e5 pawn alone and simply castles. Now he is threatening to take the pawn, since knight to d6 is no longer a threat and would actually lose to bishop takes e5, so kind of looks like black is doing okay here. But while Liu is busy congratulating himself and or feeling proud for having survived 14 moves of this oddball opening against the GOAT of chess, Magnus Carlsen now imperceptibly slips his hand down to that mysteriously located switch on his body labeled engine mode and quietly flips it on. His countenance grows subtly more sinister as he sits up a little straighter in his chair as if suddenly possessed and plays the move bishop takes c6. Liu recaptures with his queen and now comes bishop to g5. Magnus's plan is simple. Put the bishop on f6, the knight on d6, trade those bishops when the moment is right, leaving black with the dark squared Swiss cheese around his king. With pressure on f7, maybe get the knight into f6. It's all very deadly. Liu responds b6, maybe hoping by some miracle that Magnus will allow him to trade his light squared bishop for the stud on c4, and wouldn't you know it, that's exactly what he does, with the highly inaccurate queen to d2, throwing away his entire winning advantage. Now, did he accidentally flip off engine mode, or is he just toying with his prey? We may never know. What he should have played is an immediate bishop to f6, defending the pawn on e5, since after bishop to a6, now played by Liu, his knight may not jump into d6 as it would now like to, as that would just drop the pawn on e5. So that knight needs to stay put, which unfortunately for Magnus means that it will be eliminated. He now plays bishop to f6, so that after bishop takes c4 and d takes c4, there is no bishop takes e5, but there is queen takes c4. So Liu has won himself a pawn here, though after Magnus's strong reply rook to a3, white does have some very compelling compensation. And if you don't know why, you're about to find out. Liu knows why though. He now plays h5, surely anticipating Magnus's next move, rook to h3, which if the pawn were still on h7, would come with the threat of bishop takes g7, followed by queen to h6 check and mate on the next move. But even here, rook to h3 comes with a big threat. Hit that pause button quick if you'd like to try to determine what that is. If black were to make some pointless move, like a6 for example, then white could gain a crushing advantage with rook takes h5, seeing that g takes h5 would be met with queen to g5, pinning and winning the bishop on g7, as well as the game, as that would also be checkmate. So here's another pop quiz for you. How would you defend against this as black? Well, believe it or not, black only has one move that can save him. It wasn't played in the game, but that move is d3. You gotta give the queen some kingside access. This way, if rook takes h5 is played, you can respond g takes h5 and then meet queen to g5 with queen to g4 defending g7 from the queen through the queen. What's tried in the game is a move that many a strong player would misplace their trust in, king to h7, eliminating that potential pin on the g7 bishop by queen to g5 after that sacking of the rook. But this is a losing move, and one that Magnus now brutally punishes in the most forcing way possible. Take a moment and study the position if you'd like, but I think most of you probably know what's coming. although I would be willing to wager that it came as quite a shock to Liu Xianglei, who probably thought that he had adequately defended against the still winning sacrifice now executed by Magnus, rook takes h5 check. When after Liu's reply, g takes h5, it is true that queen to g5 is no longer working for white, but what is working is bishop takes g7, threatening checkmate in 2 moves, beginning with queen to h6 check. Now, fun fact, if black had played the move d3 earlier instead of king to h7, with his king still on g8, he could defend with queen to e4, ready to meet queen to h6 with queen to h7, preventing queen to h8 checkmate. Of course, the obvious question is what happens if black just takes the bishop? Well, here we have a pretty standard laddering type deal with queen to g5 check, king to h8, queen takes h5 check, king to g7, queen to g5 check, king to h8, and now rook to f4 threatening checkmate in 1. To which black's only defense is going to be to sacrifice his queen with something like d3 or queen takes c2 so he can meet rook to h4 check with queen to h7. Liu of course sees what's coming, and so in the game, seeing that his queen is doomed no matter what he does, he decides to go ahead and capture the rook on f1. When after king takes f1 and king takes g7, he's left with the 2 rooks for the queen, and would have pretty decent drawing chances if not for the exposed nature of his king, which Magnus now goes to town on with queen to g5 check, king to h7, queen takes h5 check, king to g7, queen to g4 check, king to h8, and now queen takes pawn on d4. And so with the 2 extra pawns and the still wide open black king, this is just a mop-up job for Magnus. Liu flails around for a bit with rook f to d8, we have queen to f4, attacking f7, rook a to c8, counterattacking c2, Magnus pushes c4, king to g7 defends f7, king to e2, puts an extra set of peepers on d2, wouldn't want any monkey business with an infiltration by a rook. Liu plays king to f8, giving his nervous monarch a little pawn cover, but here comes Amos the h-pawn, headed straight for the promised land, and how is black to stop it? Well, you can try Liu's move, king to e7, giving that h8 square double coverage, but Magnus knows this ain't gonna work. He just keeps pushing with h5. Liu puts a rook in front of the pawn. Not the greatest move, though in his defense, all roads do lead to his inevitable doom. This allows Magnus to pick up some more material, beginning with queen to f6 check, a move which convinces Liu Xianglei in this position to resign the game. Seeing that king to d7, the only move that keeps the rook on h8 defended, will drop the pawn on f7 with check, and after king to d8, e6 is next. And black can't even grab the pawn on h5 without losing his rook to queen to d6 check, king to e8, and queen to g6 check. So was that not glorious? I feel glorified to have even witnessed it, but as rapidly as Liu Xianglei spiraled to his destruction in the game that we just witnessed, it's nothing compared to what Magnus does to his next victim, the world's number 40, Grandmaster Andrei Esipenko, who in our game number 2, playing with the white pieces, opens with e4. Magnus responds c5, nothing quirky this time. We get some mainline Sicilian action with knight to f3, e6, d4, c takes d4, knight takes d4, a6, all the usual suspects, until we get to this move bishop to e3, which despite being very common in many types of Sicilian positions, it's not typically played quite this early. More popular here is knight to c3 or bishop to d3, defending e4 in anticipation of Magnus's next move, knight to f6, attacking it. Andrei defends with bishop to d3, so that after queen to c7, he can thrust forth with c4, hitting d5 with the second pawn before putting his knight on c3. Now black can get away with pushing d5 anyway, but Magnus just hangs back for the time being with knight to c6, maybe looking to hop into e5, maybe then go to g4 and harass the bishop on e3. Andrei is having none of that. He goes ahead and takes on c6, and after d takes c6, he puts a pawn on f4, threatening to expand with e5, attacking the knight on f6, driving it backwards. Magnus says nay to that by playing e5 himself, attacking the pawn on f4, it's pushed to f5, a bishop comes onto the scene with check, Andrei blocks with knight to c3, giving Magnus the chance to land him with doubled isolated pawns, a prospect which has the engine frothing at the mouth a bit, but Magnus is not in the mood to part with his bishop pair just yet, and so he instead plays c5. Presumably to prevent any a3 followed by b4. Andrei now lashes out on the king side with g4, a good move in many Sicilian positions, but not in this one, since if Magnus were to now take on c3, then after b takes c3, where's the safe haven for the white king? The queen side is shattered, so castling on that side of the board is not ideal, but neither is castling on the now weakened king side, or staying in the center. So a significant advantage here for black, but Magnus doesn't play this. He goes for the much weaker h6, maintaining equality. Andre should now add some defense to his knight with something like bishop to d2 or queen to c2, preventing that doubling of his pawns, but he keeps pushing on the king side with h4. Again, Magnus should capture on c3, which according to the engine now gives black a winning advantage, but instead we have bishop to d7, when again, Andre just ignores the threat of bishop takes c3 and plays rook to g1, supporting g5 next. Bishop takes c3 just keeps getting better and better for black, but Magnus continues not to play it, for whatever reason, and opts for bishop to c6, increasing the pressure on e4. Andre now decides to add some defense to his knight with queen to c2, at which point Magnus finally takes on c3. Seeing that queen takes c3 would allow him to pick up the pawn on e4. That would not be ideal for Team White, but it would have been much better than what was played in the game, b takes c3, keeping that e4 pawn twice defended, at the cost of weakening the queen side. King safety should always take precedence over a pawn, but after Magnus castles on the queen side, Andre thinks that he's all good to do the same. Now at this point, if you had told him that the game would be over in another 3 moves, he just might laugh in your face. Or at the very least, quietly conclude to himself that you're some kind of a moron who doesn't know what they're talking about. But now, let us marvel together at how quickly Magnus is able to bring the pain, beginning with queen to a5, threatening bishop to a4, which at the very least would pick up the exchange. So Andre's going to have to either move his rook or his queen. He decides to move the rook to d2 so that the queen can keep defending e4, but unfortunately for Andre, and for anyone who happened to be rooting for him, this gives Magnus a brilliant tactical sequence which effectively ends the game. Give the video a good long pause if you want to try to work it all out. It begins with the sacrifice of the rook on d5. No, I'm only kidding. It is rook takes d3, which I know is technically a sacrifice of the exchange, not a rook, but in my book, it is a sacrifice. The rook's going to be leaving the board, so I like to call it a rook sacrifice. Anyway, Andre is now facing a dilemma. Do you recapture with the rook, giving the exchange right back to bishop takes e4, pinning rook to queen with the losing position for white? Or do you go all in with the move played in the game, queen takes d3, when after bishop takes e4 played by Magnus, you're not losing the exchange, but you are losing the game, which is why Andre in this position decides to resign. So what is he seeing here? Well, after the obvious queen to e2, keeping the bishop on e3 defended in anticipation of queen takes c3 check, White's only way to prevent mate on the next move is going to be with rook to c2, but then comes queen to a1 check, king to d2 is the only move, and now rook to d8 check, when White's only legal moves are to either throw his queen in the way or to play bishop to d4, but this gives black a forced mate in 4 with rook takes d4 check, king to e3, queen takes g1 check, queen to f2, knight takes g4 check, king to e2, and queen takes f2 checkmate. So there you have it, 2 invigorating annihilations of elite grandmasters using 2 gorgeous sacrifices of the rook by the greatest rook sacrificer alive today, Magnus Carlsen. Hope you enjoyed these as much as I did. If you did, or suspect that you did, do let me know about it in the comments. Consider subscribing to the channel if you enjoyed the content and would like to see more like it in the future. Hit that like button if you liked the video. Leave an additional comment with your favorite rook sacrificing story, or anything else that's on your mind, and I will see you soon.